much, friend. So welcome everybody to Addressing Knowledge Gaps as we plan for re-entry. My name is Lacey Eccles, and I am the K-12 Science Lead. And my partner in crime today, my much better half, is Jenny Aberly, who is the high school ELA lead. So this plan was rolled out at the end of the 1920 school year, and we're going to be revisiting it today to help propel us into the next 2 weeks of work with teachers. Our purpose today is to continue thinking about the impact that remote learning has had on our students and how you as instructional leaders can support that work. So we know it's going to be a very unique beginning of the school year with new norms, definitely new challenges, and new gaps. And so we've got to start planning accordingly, or continue planning accordingly. So this slide reminds us of the vision for this work. This work is centered around teacher reflection and teacher collaboration, both vertical collaboration as well as horizontal collaboration. If you have a card today, every time you hear me say vertical or horizontal collaboration, you can put a little dot on there. So this is where teachers are making intentional instructional choices. We're shifting that mindset from a remediation and a coverage mindset to a more holistic learning progressions and experiences. And we're asking teachers, how do we scaffold up? How do we spiral in? And how do we deepen that learning? And so this work provides leaders with those entry points for coaching conversations. We should be asking ourselves as leaders, how can we leverage this re-entry as an opportunity to explore teacher thinking around instructional design, all of which is centered around that student experience and planning with the student in mind. So here's a timeline of the work that's been done thus far in regards to planning for academic re-entry. And we're currently right where you see that big old fatty arrow at the fall PLC work stage, where teachers are working together, here we go, horizontally and vertically to make intentional instructional choices. You'll notice now that Module 3 is a new module that's been released by KDE, and it's centered around responding to re-entry and how we can use formative assessments to drive our instructional decisions. And later in the presentation, you'll see a slide with links to those resources, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail then. So we encourage you and your school to continue thinking and engaging in this work together. And as a leader, consider who in your building is best equipped to lead this work. So I'm going to pass the baton over to my better half, Jenny, as she kind of begins to walk us through those action items that we discussed earlier.
Great. Thanks, Lacey. Can you all hear me okay?
We sure can. Yes.
Great. So I'm going to walk you through the steps that we shared with teachers at the end of the school year last year to try to gear us up to doing this work. Some of the work we encouraged to happen over the summer, and the big part of the work will happen right now. So Lacey, if you will bring us to the next slide. This is a snapshot of Module 2, Planning for Reentry. So we're just going to kind of look at the big picture here for a moment. So Modules 2 and 3 have actions that include teacher reflection, PLC work, and schools collaborating in those vertical and horizontal teams. There's a teacher reflection lens and a real focus on the learner. So we introduced all three of those action items in the spring and encourage teachers to complete action item 1 prior to coming back this school year. This step is the one where they would independently reflect on what they taught, what was covered, what students learned during NTI last year. So we'll be thinking about the standards, the concepts, and those learning opportunities from 2019, 2020 that were happening during their teaching in the school year. And by reflecting on those, that would launch vertical and horizontal collaboration for planning for this school year. There you see a star by action item 2 and 3. Those are the two action items that teachers should be engaged in right now. They're the work that PLCs can do these next couple of weeks to plan and prepare for this year's instruction. In action item 2, teachers would bring that reflection from action item 1 to their grade level PLCs, their course content teams, and that's where they begin to identify those potential opportunities that they have to scaffold and spiral learning for this year. That's where they'll identify those essential standards and skills alignments to the Kentucky academic standards and our JCPS curriculum frameworks. Then in action item 3, teachers and PLCs would use that information gathered from action item 2 with those PLCs and teams to consolidate information to begin to draft an adjusted plan that is learner-centered and ensures equity of access for all of our students to the learning that needs to happen. So a recommendation of resources for action item 1, Lacey, if you'll go to the next slide. To begin this important work, teachers would need copies of guidance documents. So we have tables that they can use to complete for each action item. Resources would include the JCPS curriculum framework, many of which are updated with some great resources for teachers to use this year, as well as the Kentucky academic standards for their specific content or grade. An important consideration in this work would be to lean in on the support or help of any district instructional leads or coaches or deeper learning resource teachers. We're all here to help support and work with teachers and teams on this learning. I know that there have been a couple of schools that have reached out to me, and I'm going to be working with and supporting them over the next couple of weeks to continue this work. So Lacey, if you'll go to action item 1, I'm going to just talk real quickly through this because I covered it pretty well before. So in this action item, this is where teachers are doing that individual reflection and completing table 1. And there you can see a little screenshot of what that table looks like. So during this step, they're really trying to figure out what those learning gaps are for incoming students because of remote learning. So for each course a teacher taught, they would identify the learning opportunities that students had prior to NTI, any learning opportunities that students had during NTI, and those missed learning opportunities from last year that teachers weren't able to get to or cover, or students weren't able to learn because of NTI. Something that's really important in this step is for teachers to be as specific as they can and avoid listing broad concepts. For example, I'm an English teacher, so I wouldn't just want to put the word argument in there as something that I taught. I need to be specific in terms of, did I teach claims? What about validity or reasoning and evidence? So under argument, I need to be specific on what students got and what students didn't get around argument, so that my teachers that have those students the following year, which would be this year, can help fill in those gaps of learning that may not have happened. So the more explicit a teacher can be in action item 1, the easier it will make the analysis in action item 2. So in action item 2, this is the work that should be happening now. Here's a quick review of it. I'll go a little more detail in a minute. But here's where teachers will bring their individual work for action item 1 to their grade or content level PLC to discuss and begin to determine what learning standards were considered pertinent, which we are defining as nice to know, versus essential, which we are considering the need to know standards for the school year. We know that in our contents, there are nice to knows and there are need to knows. And so we really need to focus in on maximizing our time into the need to knows. In some disciplines, those essential standards have been identified or recommended for teachers, and they can use that as a resource. In preparing for action item 2 work, there are a list of important resources that include standards documents. Lacey, we can go to the next slide. standards documents, curriculum frameworks, JCPS teacher backpack. Success skills can be a resource as teachers start to think about what that curriculum design might look like. So there are a lot of resources linked here in this slide. So let's look at some examples of some of those specific KDE resources that would be helpful for teachers. So if I'm an English teacher, here's an example of a KDE resource that would be helpful, and that's that reading progression page. When a teacher sees the progression page, they can see what a student should have learned the year prior and the year after. So when we're thinking about analyzing those standards, the progression and coherent statements are an important resource for teachers to use as they're considering designing personalized learning opportunities for students. In math, these are some resources that teachers would want to use. They're going to look at the standards page from KDE, and what we notice as we're talking about the progressions or coherent statements is that there are standards listed within the mathematical practices, but under the clarifications column, teachers will see the coherence for math. That coherence allows for vertical conversations around mathematics for both horizontal and vertical teams. And the curriculum frameworks provide more detail on the information from the KDE pages. So math teachers would want to access and use these resources for this work. In social studies, again, the curriculum frameworks from JCPS are a key resource. And the social studies progressions are listed in an appendix that can be accessed on a link in the frameworks. And you can see by looking at that table of contents for social studies that there's a lot in there. And it'd be easier to look at the progressions in a particular disciplinary strand or by grade level. So those are some resources for social studies. And finally, for science, here's a snapshot of those resources for teachers. The progressions are explained through each of the 3 dimensions and can be located in the appendices of the standards. And they're also found on the curriculum frameworks. Something important to think about for science is that the concepts don't necessarily go from one year to another, that sometimes they skip a year. So students might see a concept in one year, but then not see that concept again in the next grade, but maybe 2 grade levels ahead. Your science teachers would probably know that. Finally, for action item 2, this is what we're hoping teachers will start with this year. Now that we've looked at the resources, let's talk a little more specifically about what that action item looks like. So in this action item, grade level PLCs or course content teams will come together and they'll work through what each teacher listed in table 1 and analyze it for alignment to the standards to the grade level. In PLCs, these teachers can utilize the progression of incoherent statements to determine where to begin addressing any missed learning opportunities from last year. And they'll start to determine what are those nice to knows and what are those need to knows for the school year. Finally, an important part of the step is for those PLCs to provide a little narrative about those missed learning opportunities for those vertical conversations. The goal of this action is to be able to share this information up to the next grade level. So for example, if I was a 10th grade teacher last year, I would complete this with my 10th grade team, and then this would get shared up to the 11th grade teachers. So they'll know what missed learning opportunities happened last year so they can help fill in those gaps for students. Now Lacey's going to talk to you about action item 3, which is the next step.
So action item 3 is about taking all that work that Jenny talked about in action items 1 and 2 and finally being able to consolidate it and then develop an adjusted instructional plan for this upcoming school year. So this table represents what must go in to that instructional plan to address those learning gaps. So let's talk about the first 2 columns on this. In the first column, this is a list of the standards and or skills from those vertical conversations that you had. So like Jenny said, let's say I'm a 3rd grade teacher. I'm going to take the information that was given to me through that vertical conversation with the second grade teacher of all of the unaddressed standards. And I'm essentially going to be able to copy, paste, and drop that into that column. Then I have this second column. The second column is, if I'm that third grade teacher, what are my third grade standards that have to be taught this year? So these two columns combined will give me a great snapshot of those standards, concepts, and or skills from, again, if I'm a third grade teacher, from second and third grade that I've got to find some coherence between to use for my 2021 instructional plan. So that takes us to that bottom section. Once teachers have listed those standards, concepts, and or skills and any notes, they're ready to actually start making a plan in the bottom section. So some considerations and questions teachers should pay attention to are, where might those missing standards and or skills best fit in my year? Should there be front loading? Should there be standalone units? Or better yet, is there places for me to embed these into existing units? Or maybe it's some combination of the three. And then obviously, if we're adding to our curriculum plan, then we need to think about where can we tighten up our existing instructional plan to make time for those missed opportunities. Time's a hot commodity, right? And so some additional considerations to think about are, a tip and trick would be to create a master copy of Table 3 for that PLC content team. So this is where we're back to that horizontal conversation, put a thing on your bingo card, where the PLC and team are meeting together to make that instructional plan, which also means that there needs to be some PLC consensus around what content, concepts, and or skills should be placed in this table. And then, as we always should be considering, how can we integrate deeper learning opportunities and success skills into this instructional plan? So that is Module 2 in a snapshot. That's the work that we see teachers working on right now. Now, once teachers have done this amazing job in their PLCs to create this instructional plan, they're ready, and they've entered school, or I'm going to put school in quotation marks, they've entered school and they've started to implement this instructional plan. So reentry has occurred. Now it's time to start thinking about responding to that reentry. And that's where this Module 3 comes into play, where you'll discuss how teachers can use a variety of assessments to inform those instructional decisions. Those are going to play a critical role as we begin to embark on NTI 2.0. So linked in the slide deck, you're going to find resources from KDE for you to use with the teachers. They've done an amazing job at having a slide deck and a video to go with each piece and part of the responding to reentry. And so linked on this slide deck are the videos and the slide decks for each of those parts, as well as just a link to the KDE Academic Reentry website. It's an interesting site with some great additional resources that you might want to explore.
Lacey, we do have a question in the chat as to how they can have access to this presentation.
So I believe I saw Susan say in an earlier presentation that we would be sending PowerPoints or slide decks, whatever we call these things now, out to assistant soups to send out to principals, but I don't want to misspeak. So I will double check with Susan to ensure that that is the plan. But I guarantee we will get them in your hands ASAP. Are we good? Any other questions?
No, I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, friend. All right. So I'm going to pass it on to Jenny to bring us home.
All right. So we are here to support you during the school year doing this work. We'll continue to provide professional learning opportunities for implementation of this plan and for teachers as they plan, however, for students in the school year. We have our academic instructional coaches. We'll continue to support them and provide professional learning opportunities for them so they can support you in your school. And we'll also have content-specific professional learning opportunities throughout this year as well. as a leader, you need to think about some coherent considerations in this work and making some structures up front. While you know what to do through these modules, there are a lot of considerations and decisions that should be made beforehand to make the process clear and coherent for teachers. So as leaders in your school, you'll want to identify those folks who may provide support to those content teams and help them work through the process. You might identify specific teams to lead and guide the work. It might be AICs, it might be department chairs, PLC leads, or assistant principals, whoever you want to lead and guide the work of teachers. Thinking about what that space is. Last spring, we weren't sure if it was going to be virtual or in person, but we now know we have to work through this virtual digital platform. And think about those materials that teachers will need to access to do the work. There are links to all of the materials in this slide deck for which you will get access to, so teachers will have that. Also think about time. Teachers have a couple of weeks coming up to prepare for the first day of school for their students here at the end of August. So think about how you can build in time during these next couple of weeks for teachers and PLCs and content teams to be able to do this work. Some additional considerations are to think about the tables that teachers will be completing in each module. How are those going to be shared up to the next team or grade level? Is there going to be a process for sharing that? It might be a Google folder that everyone has access to that someone in your building sets up. And what are those structures going to be for vertical conversations? Are you going to build those into the school day over the next couple of weeks? Is it going to be entire grade level or course content team representatives who have those conversations? And how are teachers going to address their instructional plans? Like Lacey mentioned earlier, are they going to front load? Are they going to be embedding the skills, or is it going to be some combination of that? And as a leader, what are those expectations? Are the expectations going to be the same for school-wide, or course contents, or PLCs going to make those decisions? On the next slide, we have some examples of what those documents, the forms would look like for teachers during each step. So this would be a great resource for teachers if they're not exactly sure what those forms might look like. They can use and click on these links to give them a model or an example. Finally, we thank you for your time. The CDLI team is here to support you with questions, with resources as we embark on NTI 2.0. Do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions or need support in your building. We're happy to help in any way that we can.